Welcome to the Indispensables. I'm Bruce Tolgan. Today, I'm so glad to have Steve Gullickson. He's the president of MGK, an insect control development company, and a sometimes client. He's been with the organization since 1998, I think, and he runs the place. So it's an innovation company, and there's a lot. We're going to talk about innovation, and we're going to talk about the current business environment, building a team and great career strategies. Steve Gullickson, welcome to the Indispensables.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate the invitation.
Yes, so glad to have you here. And I've already learned a little bit from working a little bit with you all.
hmm
There's a heck of a lot more to the industry than most people realize, and I want people to understand because it's so interesting how much goes on behind the scenes. But first, maybe just by way of introduction, tell us your story. How did you get to where you are?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I I came out of school and wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, which I think is pretty common amongst a lot of folks. And I went to work for a company called AC Nielsen, the media tracking people, but they also had a big business around consumer products and providing sales data to marketers like P&G, et cetera. And so I was part of the crew that was out capturing those data, and it got me exposure to consumer products. And so my next transition was to go into sales of over-the-counter medicine. First worked for Bristol Myers, then I went to work for Ciba-Geigy, which quickly became Novartis, which was a really cool business experience for me. And then I was living in New Jersey. My wife and I decided we wanted to raise our kids in the Midwest. So we drew a big circle around the Midwest and started looking for opportunities. And an opportunity to join MGK, which was a family business, came up. And my family had asked me a number of times prior to that if I'd like to join. And I'd always said no, because I had older brothers and my dad, and there were plenty of Gullicksons in the business. At that particular point in time, my dad was on the path to retire, and my brother needed some sales help, and that was my area of expertise. And my wife and I wanted to live in the Midwest, so I took advantage of that opportunity in 1998 and came in a sales role, and got along, really well with my brother. As I think about it today, at the time I was super impatient. I wanted him out of the way and me running the business. Um, that that took about 7 years to accomplish. So in 2006, I took over the presidency of the business and have been in that role since. Kind of a major transition that is also important to note is we sold the business in 2012 to Sumitomo Chemical Company. So today, Sumitomo is a majority owner of the business, and they asked me to stay on, and it's really been a good run. I'm glad that I have.
So is let me start now and move backwards. Is
Yeah.
Sumitomo is a majority owner, but you guys still have a stake in the organization?
We do. We have a small stake, and so it's McLaughlin Gormley King was the original name. We call it MGK today, but McLaughlin Gormley King. So McLaughlin Gormley and King, two relatives and a friend, started the business in 1902. Started as
Wow.
spice importers, and as part of that importation process, they got exposed to an insecticide called pyrethrum, and we're still in the pyrethrum business today, which is a natural insecticide. It comes from a flower called pyrethrum. The insecticide is called pyrethrins. Pardon me. And so we've been in that business for well over 100 years, and it became our sole focus. We got out of the spice importation business and focused solely on insect control, and established a relationship with Sumitomo because they're a big producer of synthetic chemistry that we also take to the market. So today we have a portfolio that's synthetic and natural in terms of how it's derived. And so that relationship with Sumitomo was started in the early 1970s. It was formalized in 1989 with a small percentage ownership in the business, and it was further formalized in 2012 when they took a majority shareholding. So there are some McLaughlins, some Gormleys, and some Kings that still own a relatively small percentage of the business. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is your name Gullickson? Well, I'm a McLaughlin by lineage.
Got it. So somewhere in there, there's
Yep.
McLaughlin.
Yep.
Got it.
Exactly.
So there's so much here because the evolution of of a business is so interesting. And 121 years ago, the family was in the spice business,
Yeah,
and one thing led to another, right? And it ends up being insect control. So I'd love to talk about that because there's something kind of magical about that. How one thing leads to another,
yeah,
and there's so much about entrepreneurial history that could be described as one thing leads to another.
right.
The other thing I'd love to discuss with you is what it's like to sell your business and then still be there running it. And
Sure,
I'm guessing this is a strategic acquisition as opposed to like private equity or
that's correct.
some cash out approach. So that's quite interesting. And the other thing I'd love to get your take on the generational components of the business, the family business, and you joked, I think, in case your brother ever hears this podcast, about scaring him off or running him off or whatever.
Right.
but I suppose that your father maybe or maybe your grandfather or uncles or something were in the business. So I'd love to talk about all that. First,
Okay.
let's start in 1902 and the history of the business. At what point did your ancestors, I guess, for lack of a better word, at what point did they realize that there was more promise in the insect control than in the spices?
Let me just give you a kind of a quick rundown, and I think it'll answer that question. So, 1902, it's Alexander McLaughlin, Gormley, and King. Um, King and McLaughlin are relatives; they're brother-in-laws, and Gormley's just a friend. And Gormley never participates in the business; kicks the money in. He runs pharmacies. And if you think about 1902, the spices that they were bringing in for sure were used for food, but they also set up a company called Twin Cities Drug, and they were basically creating what we call nutraceuticals today. But at the time, it was symptomatic relief compounds that they would put together, and I'm sure Gormley sold some of those through his pharmacy. Um, King and McLaughlin didn't really get along very well. So there you go. Here's relative, story 101. They don't really like each other. And then my grandfather, George McLaughlin, Alexander's son, reluctantly joins the business. His dad starts to get ill, gets severely ill relatively quickly, and George joins the business in his early 30s, really having no intention to be in the business. Um, Fast forward through, and that was in about 1930 or so just coming out of the Depression. By the way, Alexander McLaughlin paid payroll out of his own pocket in 28 and 29 and
Wow.
kept the business alive. So George takes over in around 1930 or so, and at this point, Kings are kind of out of the business, and Gormleys have never been in it. So that's really McLaughlin's. And George McLaughlin works for MGK for 50 plus years,
Wow.
into his early 80s, and he in about 1960 recognized. There's a great picture. He recognized that everybody around him was his age, and he's like, "I got a problem. I don't have any young people." So he calls up his son-in-law, my dad, who is successfully selling sports magazines based out of Chicago. My mom and dad are loving living in Chicago, and says, "Hey, will you come to work for the company?" And to give you a sense of my dad answers on the phone, "Sure," and never asked my mom. And so goes home and says, "We're moving to Minneapolis." And my mom's like, "You crazy? We're loving Chicago." And my dad comes through the door in 1960 and recognizes we are losing money on spices and making money with insecticides. And there's your transition where the company, which is duly focused, it's a new set of eyes walks through the door and says, "You know what? This isn't going very well for us." And oh, by the way, McCormick's and Lowry's have created a national distribution system, and we're still selling just in the 5-state area. We're literally getting crushed. And so let's get out of that business. And the fun part of that story, and my dad told me this story, is my dad went to George McLaughlin and said, "We got to sell this business," and George said, okay, but I'm not telling the employees, you have to do that. I'm going out to lunch. You tell all the people who are packing spices that their careers are over. So that's what
How
my dad got to
interesting.
do. And so we exited. We actually sold the business to a company based in Michigan, and from 19 basically 61 maybe 62, we're we're solely focused on insect control from that point
So
forward. And
so
my
so let me just
yeah,
ask, whatever happened to the spice business
yeah,
that
so the
got
Michigan
sold?
company ultimately went under. It lasted about another decade or so, but they didn't make it either. They couldn't get that national foothold. Um,
So your
one of the
father
brands
read the tea
he
leaves.
did, he
And
did.
and just to bank that lesson for a minute, so it had to be a hard thing to tell his
Oh,
father-in-law, gee, I think that this part of the business is not healthy. It had to be, it was a real savvy call. Maybe he just took a look at the books and could see what the trajectory was. But it
yeah.
takes guts to have those conversations, and it takes guts to realize that. And so that's a great story. I really appreciate your going into those details. Just out of curiosity, do you guys have has somebody written a corporate history?
We do have a corporate history. Yeah, we have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because that's a good one. That's a rich
yeah,
one.
yep,
And it's the kind of thing that if you don't, you need one.
yeah.
So um, so then, as of the early '60s, somebody realized. Well, your father realizes that it's insect control, and that's been the business ever since.
It has been. And so in the 1960s, we really were kind of a one, kind of two horse shop. We had natural perethrum, and believe it or not, we were in the repellent business as well. The on skin mosquito repellent, selling DEET. And so my dad spent a lot of his time and energy courting relationships with companies that had technology that we could use to build better insect control products. So Sumitomo came into the picture, and companies like Bayer and BSF and others came into the picture. His goal was to find a relationship that someone would give us basically exclusive rights to manage the United States, ideally North America. And ultimately, Sumitomo's the party who stepped up and said, not only will we give you the United States, we'll give you Canada as well, and we will give you exclusive rights. Anything we develop, you guys get the rights to develop the market with that chemistry in the United States in exchange for an equity position in the company. And that's the deal that we did in 1989, which really set the company. Not that it wasn't firmly in place that we were in the insect control business by that point. I think we were, Bruce, but it clearly defined this is absolutely what we're going to be doing, and we have a partner now in the process.
And so, how much of the innovation occurs in Sumitomo labs, and how much of the innovation occurs in MGK labs?
So we do the formulating side, and they do the synthesis side. So we don't do any synthesis chemistry. We don't try and develop molecules on our own, but we take chemistry that's been developed by them and by other parties. We're pretty agnostic. No offense to Sumitomo. We try and get our hands on the best chemistry in order to deliver the best solution into the market. So we're when I say product development, we're formulators. We take disparate pieces of chemistry, combine them together, and try and provide a better solution than already exists in the market today.
Got it. And so, how does that play out? So you're if you like, how many people are at MGK, and are they? How many of them are in an innovation environment? How many of them are in a production environment? How many are in a logistics environment? And how many
Yeah.
are in sales?
Yeah, I'll give you rough numbers because I don't know them exactly, but we're heavily invested in product development, so that it is a group of folks that is, if you compared us to our competition, I think we're overinvested, comparatively overinvested in product development, but it is our engine. Bringing new news to the market is our engine, and so we've got chemists and chemical engineers and entomologists and biologists. I'm the business guy. I'm surrounded by scientists, which I love, and so we're in terms of percentage of our employee group, I would say in rough numbers, Bruce, probably 30, perhaps approaching 35% are oriented towards new product development. And now that's marketing too, because our marketing department is responsible for bringing ideas and challenging ideas. Um, and so it's marketing, chemistry, R&D, regulatory. That whole package is what brings us allows us to bring products to market. And we have two really robust sales forces, and then we have a very good ops team. We make Today, Bruce, we make about 90% of what we sell. About 10% we get from someone else or license from somebody. But most of the products we bring to market, we make them. Is in addition to developing them, we make them as well.
So you have a whole outfit that's basically starts with the marketing requirements document, goes through gate zero, is
Yep.
the proof of concept, and then you have a gate review system, and
Yep.
some at some point research hands off to development, and then you're bringing product to market.
Yep.
And your sales team, you say you have two different sales team. Is one business to business, or do you have how does your sales operation work?
Yeah. The easiest way to explain that is to think about all the different ways that you can get insect control. So today, Bruce, you can walk into a retailer and get insect control products. You could get on the web or pick up the phone like the old days and call a pest control company. Um, and so we've designed sales forces to serve both those. In all cases, we're selling business to business. We sell through distributors, people who can do a better job on the logistics side than we can. Um, the other piece where insect control is really important is in your food protection. So we have an agricultural component as well as an animal protection component, and we have sales forces calling on those experts as well. So if I'm a strawberry grower in California, somebody from MGK is going to come visit me and talk a little bit about how I can get a better yield out of my strawberry field. If I'm a poultry operator in Ohio, someone from MGK is going to visit me and talk to me about how I can keep my insect populations as minimized as possible. Um, and,
Or
and
maybe even if there's an agricultural co-op in Kansas that runs grain elevators or something. All of those, it seems like there's a lot more insects than people out there. So
that's true.
it's really what would happen without insect control technology.
Yeah, the way I look at it is kind of just the exact opposite, Bruce, which is, isn't it cool that you can go sit in a restaurant, you can go to a hotel room, you can be in your home, and almost always not be bothered by insects or mice or rats. And we're not in the mice or rat business, but I got to tip my hat to the professionals who provide those products as well. So we live in this amazingly sanitary environment, and most the places in the world that you travel to are more sanitary today than they were a decade ago, and certainly more so than they were 30 to 40 years ago. And you got to give some of that credit to our industry, because that's what we do. We literally are in the sanitation, which really means we're in the health business. We make your life and everybody's life more healthy by providing these solutions to insects. Because the alternative, a room full of cockroaches or a tent full of mosquitoes or a bedroom full of bed bugs is not a safe place. It's just not.
Yeah, and I mean, I certainly don't want to sleep with bed bugs, and I don't
Right.
want cockroaches in my kitchen and all that.
Right.
And sometimes I'll say to people who complain about DEET or whatever, how'd you like to try malaria?
Right.
Because that's the alternative.
Right.
What do you guys? What's your take on the whole the issues of environmental contamination? And I'm sure you have a whole beat on that.
Yeah, we do. So, I think, is there a product that gets overused? And I think the answer to that is yes. Um, and is there an opportunity to do a better job of education? And I think the answer is yes. And we own a part of that. On the other hand, I, I disagree with the people who think that some of these insects that we control really are just kind of bothersome and not that big of a problem. Because the reality is in large enough quantities and even in small quantities, things like roaches and fire ants and bed bugs, they're problematic. And there are people that argue, oh, they're not that, in the scheme of things, they're really not that dangerous. The reality is the science seems to point to, yeah, they are. Whether in the case of cockroaches, as an example, there's ample scientific evidence, and this is going to kind of gross you out. But when they poop, that poop dries and gets aerosolized, and it causes asthma in kids, particularly in inner cities of a lot of our urban areas. Well, that's solvable. So we feel pretty cool that we have a solution for that, and we think it's better to provide the solution than to let the problem continue to exist.
Yeah, I mean, do you run across objections
Sure,
you
all the
do?
time. Yeah, and the language mostly used is, "Oh, your chemistry is dangerous." And the reality is, if it's misused, that's correct. When it's used correctly, it's not dangerous, um, and that's the misnomer, right? You know, the issue is there's lots of things we can kill ourselves if used in abundance, and probably the best example is water, right? You drink too much water, you can kill yourself, or you can drown in it, right?
Sure.
So, and it's just chemistry amongst all the different types of chemistries in the world. So, chemistry by itself isn't dangerous unless it's misused, and it can be used and misused. All chemistry can be misused, but when it's used correctly, the solution is far better than the problem. I'm super confident when I say this. Almost, I would say all the time, but certainly very close to almost all the time. When used correctly, chemistry is appropriate.
Yeah, and so are a lot of the scientists in your R&D operation? What are they? Biochemical engineers and stuff like that?
So chemists, some chemical engineers, some entomologists, and some biologists in our group. I don't think we have any biochem people, but for sure chemists and chemical engineers.
Got it, got it. And so, it, it, what do you make of the fact that you started out in pharmaceutical sales and the company was in the business of nutraceuticals until the early '60s? And is that just a big coincidence?
It's a big coincidence, but I think it's kind of cool. You know, and I'll be honest with you. When I was at Bristol and Novartis, you know, I left there in the '90s, and in the '90s we were starting to talk about, hey, you know, this whole kind of nutraceutical, we got to keep an eye on it. It wasn't a particularly large threat at the time. I don't think it's taken as much share as some people thought it would by this point in time, but to me, it's kind of cool. There's, you know, in our industry, there's a bunch of solutions that are made from a wide variety of naturally occurring chemistries, like, you know, whether it be wintergreen or lemongrass and things like that. And they're really interesting, and we're trying to study those and understand them. We're not actively participating in those type of chemistries today, but we certainly want to understand them. And if they deliver good results, then we want to be in that business for sure. So we're constantly looking at stuff, Bruce, all the time. And like most things as it relates to new product development, most things fail, but it's really cool when you find one that works.
Yeah, well, you got to swing at a lot of pitches if
You
you're
got
going
to
to hit
swing
a
a
home
lot.
run. But before we leave that behind, I'm always eager to get people to talk about what they learned in their early career opportunities. I've worked with plenty of pharmaceutical companies and plenty of pharmaceutical sales forces, or usually with their managers, and I've learned a lot from them, and I think that the skill set is worth acquiring. What I guess my question is, uh, what did you learn doing that stuff that you brought forward with you into the family business?
You know, I think a couple things. One is, you know, I had just amazing mentors when I was coming up through my career. Fantastic leader when I was at Bristol Myers. I was out in California at the time, and just super supportive. And at that point in the early to mid 1990s, very, you know, the sales process was very process oriented, kind of the, you know, start 6-step selling and consultative selling, but it was very kind of formulaic. And so we spent a lot of time and energy on that. And I think as much as that was a process, it also was a way to establish a relationship. And, you know, in the early 1990s, selling, there was a lot of emphasis about it's not the relationship, it's the process. But the reality is it's some sort of combination of both. And so I think I took that when I went to Ciba Geigy, and at Ciba Geigy, it was a really cool experience for me, Bruce. So I got to start a department in a company, a department that didn't exist. It was called
Okay.
trade marketing, and so I started that for Ciba Geigy, And my boss there also was a great friend and unbelievable mentor. Um, and I think I learned a lot around people management in that role. So Bristol Myers process and selling process, and then Novartis, the people side of it. So I was able to bring both those things to MGK. The other thing I brought to MGK was the mentality of a large company oriented person into a really small business. When I joined MGK, there were probably 45 employees, and I came from organizations with thousands. And so, in one respect, I had a lot of buyer's remorse. I will tell you that because, like, where are all my functional experts? They don't exist, right? We all wear huge hats. We all have really
Right.
big jobs.
Yeah,
Um,
and founder-led companies are amazing, but they're often sort of stitched together with
sure.
idiosyncrasies and band-aids.
Right, right, for sure. And so I came with two expectations. One, the pace would be incredibly onerous because that's what I came from. And two, there'd be all this expertise. And I quickly learned that doesn't exist. And it was really cool. Probably within the first 3 or 4 months, one of the employees who's still a mentor for me and a great friend said, we don't have to go at the pace from which you came from. I said, really? He goes, yeah. Trust me. If you slow down a little bit, it'll be a more enjoyable ride. And so I kind of I adjusted my pace a little bit. I for sure cranked up the pace at MGK, but I didn't take it to a Bristol or a Novartis pace. And I think that's really been helpful for the business, and made it more enjoyable for everybody. At least I hope so.
So in your second role, when you were starting a department, did you have to bring people together,
I
recruit a
did.
team, set up systems, practices, and just from scratch?
From scratch, and I had to create credibility with the sales force, with marketing as well. So trade marketing was kind of a intermediary between marketing and sales. And there's always been tension between marketing and sales, and I actually think that's super healthy. But sometimes it gets to the point where marketing is like, oh, sales doesn't know what they're doing, and sales like, oh, marketing doesn't know what they're doing. So our job was to convince both sides. Actually, we both know what we're doing, and we're making progress. And let's focus on progress versus what we think's right or wrong. And that was really fun. And so it didn't exist. And in retrospect, I didn't actually hire anybody internally, and so that makes me smile because I brought all external people in, created a department, and ultimately we got into category management, trade promotion, and supporting all the sales materials and other things that were really kind of evolved into a sales ops type department. It's a fantastic experience, and I wouldn't have changed except for two things. One is my brother came and said, "Hey, I need some help," and two, my boss at the time, when I joined the company, said, It's 3 years. I'm gonna be here 3 more years, and then you can take over as VP of Sales." That was my goal. And after about 2 years, we sat down from our review, and I said, "So how are we doing?" He said, "We're doing great." I said, "How you doing?" He goes, "Yeah, like 3 more years." And I had learned enough about him that he was never going to leave. Like
Uh-oh, yeah.
he
And that
loved it, and he did a great job. And so I knew that path was going to be a lot longer. And then kind of the fun, perhaps funny side of the story is, as I mentioned to you, my family had graciously offered me opportunities at various points in time to join the business, and my mom had never lended her voice. And in this occasion, my mom called me and said, "Get on the team." And I don't think I ever told my mom no. So that was the deciding factor that it was time to go. And
so this was not a career decision. I mean, if you're a good boy, you do what
a
your mother
family
said.
decision, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. And so the timing was good, and I like what you were saying about the first role, about the idea of process based selling, and I think it's true in sales discourse that there's sort of a cycle of it's all about the relationship, and then no, it's all about the process. And of course, the more you have sales personnel turning over, the more the company wants it to be about process and
Right,
not relationship.
right.
And so they want the company to own the process because it's hard to own a relationship. Where do you end up on that? I kind of have come full circle to where I've begun to see more and more that these peculiar animals, these humans, that relationship, it's pretty hard to get out from under that.
Yeah. So where we are, and I got to give my sales team the credit for this, is where we are is is we've shifted our sales approach from selling our products to making our customers more successful. And so what we've basically uh, placed our bet on is if you grow, we ride your coattails. And so our conversation has shifted from here's here are the features and benefits of our products. We don't do that at all. We talk about what do you need, where do you have challenges, and then we intersperse our product in this. Hey, this could help you in terms of the challenges that you're facing. This will provide you with better results than you're currently experiencing. We really push hard for trial. So we are confident that if we get trial, we'll get adoption for our products. And so the biggest challenge is how do you get someone to change their behavior? And think about it. If you're a professional pest control operator or a guy servicing a poultry farm or a guy treating a strawberry field and you had good results last year, what are the chances you're going to change your behavior this year? It's hard, and so you got to get them to trial. Small trial, small test to get a good result, and then it's a relationship. It's working on that relationship. So I think, Bruce, it's still that some sort of link between process and relationship, because it's not all relationship. There's definitely a selling process there, and the process is really about winning, knowing when to push for the sale. That there's enough evidence that a sale should be had at this point in time.
So it's interesting because you still have that fundamental sales instinct, right?
Yep.
That must be a big part of how you lead the organization.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, that's yeah. I mean, what really you're talking about value selling,
Right.
and that's in the end. I mean, even if you're not in a business relationship, my view is at least that if it's family, if it's friends, if it's civic, if it's community oriented, I always look at relationships in terms of, do you approach them in terms of what you need or want, or do you approach them in terms of what you bring to the table, how you can add value in every conversation, in every interaction? um, and so I think fundamentally, some people don't look at relationships that way, but when I think about human relationships, what is our interdependency? What is our cooperation, our collaboration? What is the relationship about? And I think that the most joy, frankly, and the most and the most success comes when you focus on what you can do for other people. So
Yep.
it seems like you've managed to weave together process and relationship.
That we're working on it all the time, but that's the direction we're going for sure.
Okay, so your succession planning now is all sorted out because you've had this strategic sale to a strategic acquirer. You can thread that needle any way you want. But a lot of times, folks come to us because they're in this generational business, and they're scratching their head about, one kid doesn't want to be part of the business, or someone does, but the older generation isn't quite sure that's the right person. In this case, probably your brother. I'm just kidding. I'm sure your brother's a heck of a guy. But but
He is.
but uh, yeah, tell us about that. I mean, what have you learned about working with family, about generational business dynamics, succession from one generation to the next?
Yeah. I think what I've learned is there's just no one game plan, and it's unique to each business. It's unique to each family. In our case, so I'm the youngest of four boys, and the brother I worked with was the oldest of four boys. And there's a pretty, there's about a 10-year gap in us. So, we're almost arguably from different generations. So, and the two middle guys, brothers, never really participated. So, and so I think that age gap helped from a business relationship standpoint because when we grew up we didn't fight each other. That the the middle of the two younger fought each other, the two older fought each other. So there wasn't any sort of animosity involved. Um, and I think the other component to it is my parents are really good about managing expectations that the business is, that this business isn't your future. All four of you guys have to go find your own way. And if you choose to find that way in the business, we're not going to guarantee you that you're going to be successful in the business. I think that was really helpful from that standpoint. And so I knew when I came out of school, I wasn't joining the family business. I wanted to do something else. And honestly, Bruce, I never intended to join the business. And in retrospect, I'm really glad I did. One of the things I did when I joined the business, which, I'll be honest with you, I now am second guessing quite a bit. And that is I set a family policy that nobody's going to join the business unless they bring something of relevance, some sort of skill set, that they're educated well enough and they have some experience. And I did that because I overheard a nephew say at a party, if my primary career plan doesn't work out, I always have MGK. And I'm like, no, MGK is not going to be the backup plan. And so I put this family policy in place, and it was so effective that none of the 14 nieces and nephews ever raised their hand and said, could I join, except for one. We had one of my nephews came in as an intern, did really good work. And then we had a job open up in customer service, and my team came to me and said, can we hire your nephew because we really like him? And I thought, oh crap, I'll have to compromise the family policy. Yeah, let's hire him because he was an intern, right? So he does bring relevant experience.
Sure.
So we hired him, and he was outstanding. Bruce, he was just great. And and so then I thought, for my two kids and the other nieces and nephews, darn it, maybe I shouldn't have been so rigorous on the plan. So I just don't think there's a right or wrong. I know there's not a right or wrong. Um,
So is your
Families
nephew
just got
still
to
in the
make
business?
decisions. But
Is your nephew still in the business?
he's not. He actually decided to go to grad school in Europe, and he's still in Europe, and he's just doing fantastic. And I do believe his experience at MGK helped him launch him into the success that he is in Europe today. And I think he'd agree with that as well. But
And so none of the next generation will be part of the business.
well, so I mean, at this point in time, there's nobody from the next generation in the business. That's correct.
And interesting. And you have second thoughts about that.
I do. I
So
do. And
so
again, I don't
okay.
think there's a right or wrong, Bruce. I just, I mean, I don't think I was wrong, but I'm also super curious. Had I let a few more bodies in, what would we look like today? And I'll never know the answer to that question.
Understood. Yeah, and I've seen diametrically opposite strategy lead to a whole assortment of
Yeah, right.
nieces and nephews
Just
working side
disasters.
by side. And no, sometimes they are like the one you overheard at the party, where they're just bystanders, but they got
Right.
an office, and then you have all kind of resentments. So I think your instinct to avoid that was a wise one. But I wish there were more. So yes, of course, all styles can play out successfully,
Right.
perhaps even if not all styles are equally valid. And yes, every story is unique. But I mean, were there ever interactions between you and your father, say, or between you and your brother, or anything that presents lessons for others who are in generational businesses?
Yeah, I think I'll share two stories. Well, maybe three. So the first is I didn't recognize it at the time, and now I actually can appreciate it. So my first participation with MGK is my dad asked me to join the board. So I actually joined the board in either '96 or '97, and I thought nothing of it other than he just asked me to join the board. Now I recognize that was that was the first taste of he'll become interested in the business, and now and maybe we can get him to join the business someday. So I did, at the time I didn't think there was any sort of objective there, but I think in retrospect probably that was, hey, let's get Steve some exposure to the business because we need a successor. Um, the second piece was when I was pushing my brother, um, that I really wanted to be president of the business. I wanted to run the business, the day to day business, and I just didn't feel like he really wanted to continue to run the day to day business. So we hired a coach, a personal coach, and that was a really good thing to do. And that coach really helped us by asking us lots of questions around where are you going and where are you going, and what does success look like for you. So don't worry about titles and things like that. Like, what do you want to be doing? And the reality is the difference between my brother and me is so dramatic. So I love the pursuit of business and the pursuit of a sale and the driving market share, and he loved the policy side and regulatory. And so we were very complimentary of each other, but it was time for us to shift roles. And so that coach helped us to get him to say, hey, I can be chairman and still be equally as effective in the things I like to do. And Steve can be president and be effective in the things that he wanted to do. So that was a great, that ability to have an objective set of eyes look at us and say, hey, you can do this and you can do this. And by the way, neither of you loses status in this scenario, right?
And so
Don't
just
worry
to be
about that
clear,
part.
this was not a coach like rah rah, but rather an objective third party
Yeah,
brought in to sort of do some mediation, some counseling, some take a
yeah,
step back, and help you both chart your
yeah.
courses for the best interest of the business.
Yeah, because I was getting frustrated. I'm pretty sure he was getting frustrated, but we were kind of stymied, and so we just needed another voice in the process, and
And
that was super
everything's a
helpful.
okay. You guys are still on
Everything's
good terms.
great. Well, yeah, and so then I sell the business in 2012, and the first thing I have to do is fire my brother. So how fun is
Oh
that?
no, gee
And
whiz.
and the best news about that is he knew it was coming, even though it was still hard. The the hardest one was my mom, who, as you know from my earlier story, brought me into the business, and she says to me, "Hey, you owe him." And I said, we don't owe him anything. He's been well compensated. He's been well received by the company all this point in time. And by the way, he and I both knew this was coming. Doesn't make it any easier. Doesn't make it any more fun. But that was that was a bridge we had to cross. And by the way, if he was sitting next to me now, he would say to you, "It hurt, and it set me up for." He actually became a CEO of a different company, and he had a blast until he chose to retire on his own accord. And I think in fact, I know he would be sitting by here by my side saying, "It actually worked out great."
It just was awkward at
It's
Thanksgiving,
super
maybe.
awkward,
Yeah.
super awkward. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a tough one. So
yeah.
you said there was a third story.
Well, those are the three stories. So my dad hiring me, then hiring a coach, and then having to fire my brother. So
Got
those
it,
are
got it,
three.
got it. Okay, excellent. That's
I
three.
think the
Yes,
lesson,
three. That's three.
yeah.
That's
And
good.
you asked me, what is the lesson? I think the lesson is family will always be family. So my brother and I were a little bit short with each other before we figured out the presidency thing. We got a little short with each other when I had to let him go, and we are, none of that. There's no baggage carried forward from that. So we figured out how to move along after that, which is I think is great.
And here you are running this growing, monumentally successful organization. Surely that's in the best interests of the family as
For sure,
well as all the other constituents of the business.
for sure.
And so, do you have if you were riding up an elevator and you were to tell someone the secret of your success, is there a secret to your success?
I'm unaware of any particular secret. Um, I think just the process of maturing. So when I was in my early sales role, I was following the game plan. I think today that the game plan is much less clear, and that's a good thing. And so now it's about building the right team, putting the right people in place. It's about building community. I call it community development. We work, Bruce. We work very hard on our community because in a perfect world, every one of our employees comes to work every day because that's where they want to be. It's not because I have this job. It's because this is where I want to be. And we're not there yet, but we're pretty darn close. And so that's pretty cool. And I don't, at Bristol and Novartis, there were incredibly talented people, but there were for sure people there that were just doing a job. They didn't really want. It wasn't where they wanted to be every day. It isn't where they would choose to be every day. That's kind of what I think I'm working for today is a community of people that are like, yeah, when I get up, I just really want to come to MGK and hang out with my peers and move the business along.
And it's a place to build community by adding value,
Yeah,
hang out with my peers, and move the business along.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that is excellent parting wisdom. Steve Gullickson, thank you for being a guest on the Indispensables.
My pleasure.